Good morning, everybody. Members of the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, staff, and members of the public who may be listening in. It's a November day. And I'd like to start our meeting today by asking Grant Bevall for a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Beginning with Member Beatty. Member Brady.
Good morning.
I have regrets from members Clark and members Kuhn-Peterson. Member Cridland.
Here.
I have regrets from member Fior. Member Foster.
Present.
Member Halinga.
Present.
Member Ingrail. Okay, we'll circle back. Member K-Wall.
Present.
Member Hewson.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. And of course, Chair Johnson is not able to attend. Member Metcalf.
Good morning and present.
Member Rapley.
Present.
Member Shurton.
Present.
Member Smith.
Yes.
Member Steele.
Here.
Member Woodhouse. Member Wright.
Here. Present.
We have quorum. And of course, our chair, Member McKenzie, pardon me.
Thank you, Grant. I'd like to start the meeting with a land recognition. The Niagara Peninsula watershed is located on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples dating back countless generations. We wish to show our respect for their contributions and recognize the role of treaty making in what is now Ontario. The Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority grieves with the Indigenous peoples and communities across the country on the tragic loss of so many children to the residential school system. We acknowledge that with this difficult history comes the responsibility to honor those who were lost and to strive to better understand how we can support affected communities. The NPCA stands committed to improving our relationships with Indigenous peoples and working with them to ensure an equitable and meaningful future for all. So folks, we'd like to move on now to the approval of the agenda. And before we ask for a mover for this, there is a delegation who is asked to speak to us today. That information has been sent to you previously. So the motion to approve the agenda will...
Mr. Chair, if I may interrupt, I'm sorry. I think we were going to do staff introductions first.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Grant. Seeing I'm already halfway through this, then we'll get into staff introductions. And another change to the approval of the agenda is there's no closed session required as the last agenda item. So could I have a mover for the approval of the agenda, please? And Member Hewson, thank you. Second by Member Brady. All in favor? Could I see a show of hands? Okay, take that as a positive vote. So that's items approved. And now I'm going to move over to an introduction of our staff team. And I'd introduce Adam Christie, the director for our conservation lands. Mr. Christie, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Vice Chair McKenzie, for letting me give an introduction to our land operations team today. I'd like to start with our Manager of Conservation Area Services, Alicia Powell, who oversees all of the services on all of our 41 conservation areas, including camping, events, weddings, all the services that we offer. We'll continue with our conservation area services team with Catherine Ursini. Catherine, can you put your video on? There you are. Catherine overlooks all of our weddings and also plays a big portion in all of our events, including all the vendors and putting on our Thanksgiving festival and our upcoming holiday trail. We'll slide over to Jenna Moorhead. Is Jenna there? Jenna is our Educate Program Assistant with the NPCA. Jenna supports all of our educational programming at Balls Falls. And we have Nicholas Bradley. Nicholas Bradley is our land operations admin who supports all of our initiatives in land operations and handles all the public inquiries. Continuing with Balls Falls Conservation Area, we have our superintendent and assistant superintendent. Our superintendent is Rob Currett. Rob, can you say hi?
Morning.
You muted. There you go. And Mariah Tempest. Hi, Mariah.
Hello.
Both of them support the daily operations at Balls Falls Conservation Area and play crucial roles into all the services we offer at Balls Falls, including the daily events, educational programming, and the festivals as well. On that note, we'll head over to Bimbrook Conservation Area where I see Mike Boyko. Mike, say hi.
Good morning, everyone.
Bimbrook is one of our most growing in popularity visited properties that we have, and Mike and his assistant, who's not here today, Joycey Rucka, do the daily operations at Bimbrook Conservation Area. We'll continue to Long Beach Conservation Area, which we see our superintendent, Michael McIntyre, and our assistant superintendent, Robert Parasotti. Long Beach, again, is one of experienced some extremely high visitation this year with all of our campgrounds, and both of them run daily operations at Long Beach Conservation Area. On the campground note, we'll head to Chippewa Creek Conservation Area. I believe there's Nathaniel Devos, who is our superintendent. Our assistant superintendent, Bob Hayslip, couldn't make it today, but both of them run the daily operations at Chippewa Creek Conservation Area. We'll head to our Gainesboro Conservation Area. The Gainesboro Conservation Area's purpose is to support our 37 passive conservation areas and the maintenance of all of the passive recreation trails along those. You see them? There they are. Jeff Fazekas, who is our capital projects coordinator, supports the capital projects at all of our properties. And our superintendent, Rob Schultz, and our assistant superintendent, Brent Cumming. And last but not least is our land operations ecologist, Kim Frolick. Kim, do you want to give a little blurb what you do?
Good morning. I deal with plants and animals and the relationship with the physical environment for an ecosystem approach. I also deal with species at risk, including being on the species at risk recovery team and implementation on our conservation area properties. I deal with restoration and monitoring on our conservation areas for erosion, habitat, and species at risk improvement, including the development and implementation of restoration at the Wainfleet Bog. I'm involved in the development of the Conservation Authority's land acquisition strategy to ensure ecological components are represented on our properties for environmental health. And I'm involved in funding applications pertaining to our conservation.
Adam, can you hear me?
And I assist in developing ecological policies for our Conservation Authority.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Chair McKenzie, that's it for our land operations team. Thank you for letting us share that.
Adam, I would like to, through you to your staff, on behalf of Chair Johnson and the rest of the board, thank you and your staff for such a great job that everybody has done, especially over this COVID period. You've all been exposed to situations that no game book or rule book was ever written for, and you've been creative and persuasive, and you've stayed at the post. So thank you very, very much to all of your staff and yourself for allowing this Conservation Authority and the Conservation Authority movement to remain strong in Niagara, our watershed, through this period. And I do hope that it will be soon that we are getting back to a new normal. So thanks again to everybody for coming out today and sharing your time with us. Have a good day and a good weekend and a great year. Stay well. Thanks, Adam.
We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Declarations of conflict of interest. Does anybody have any they wish to declare? Seeing no hands. I'm not seeing a lot of screens at all. If you have one, please announce it. Approval of minutes. And I'm going to ask today, just being a little different, if I can ask for a seconder and a mover for these motions, because as the screens come and go, I'd like to see a hand and put a person. We also have a few people that are, as you know, that are not with us today. So could I have a mover for the minutes of the October 15th full authority meeting? Member Woodhouse and Member Hewson. Good morning, Member Cridland. Grant, from the roll call, Member Woodhouse was not present, and I'm not sure about Member Cridland, but I'm sure you can make note of that. So, all in favor of approving minutes? Thank you. Minutes approved. And we're now on to item 4A. And Grant, I'm just checking. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Thank you. So our first item is correspondence dated October 18th, 2021 from the clerk and manager policy at the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. And it deals with wetland water balance modeling guidance document. This is for receipt and referral. And before I ask for a motion to receive this correspondence, and you'll notice from your agenda that it is a lengthy document. And as to its importance, I would like to ask upon our CAO, Chandra Sharma, to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair McKenzie. I just want to provide some context. The report in front of you from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority is based on many years of research. It's grounded in solid science and has been vetted through with consultations with the industry, and it was developed as part of request from the industry to get better guidance on these type of issues through the planning process. Both Director Yate and myself have been associated with this work in the past, I should say that, and are very familiar with this. So we are pleased to see it here. And Director Yate is ready to answer any questions if board members have. That's all I would say on this one at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO Sharma. So this is being moved by Jack Kalinga, seconded by, anybody got a hand? Okay, Member Smith. And all in, we have a moment for discussion, and Leanne is with us, so if there are any questions, Member Kalinga, I see your hand hand up. Do you have any questions, Jack?
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I
please.
do have a comment, and I just find this phenomenal. I support it 100%. It is something that I'm passionate about. I hope that all of the board support it. I would like to add that we receive it, we refer it, and that we ask for a timeline to get it back from staff and get the decision to adopt the same modeling criteria for wetlands in the NPCA area. And I have spoken with the CAO, and I have put forward the request that it come back to the board for NPCA adoption by the meeting in January. So I would like to have support for the referral to come back to
Hello,
the
good
NPCA
Good.
by
How did you make
the
out?
meeting, January board
Yeah.
meeting.
Jack, can you just hold on there a second? Member Gail, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. Go ahead, Jack. Member Alinga, you're muted.
I hope my internet was stable enough to have that entire comment go through. And if there's any comment from the CAO or staff member Yates, that would be acceptable.
Well, thank you, Member Alinga, for that positive comment. And I will ask staff if they feel that January is a reasonable date to report back. We have December coming up, and it's a few year-end things. So, CAO Sharma, where are we with that January date?
So thank you, Chair Mackenzie, to Member Halinga, through you. What we can do by January deadline is staff are intending to include this in our procedural manual for the work we are doing for updating our planning policies. And there is a report scheduled to come to the board in December or January on the update on the policy work we are doing, the gap analysis and next steps. And some high-level overview of the procedural manual of what will be included in that. So as part of that, this has been my discussion with Member Halinga that we totally intend to include this in that document, and that's what we want to bring to the board at that time. In the meantime, staff will continue to seek scientific guidance from the work that is being presented to you today. Leilani, would you like to add anything to this?
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt staff for a second. Member Gray, could you go back to mute? Thanks very much. And Leonie, does that sound all right to you? I think that's what our CEO was asking.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, board members. Yes, we do intend to bring forward a report that speaks to the progress that we've made on our policy update, procedural manual, and a work plan for moving forward into 2022. And at a high level, we will identify some of the gaps that we've identified to this point. As it currently stands, when we do review planning applications that do involve wetlands, we do communicate closely with our Conservation Authority peers to use the best available information and science, as Chair Chandra noted. And in practice, when a water balance is appropriate for the site, we are referencing these documents from the TRCA and CBC currently, and working with applicants through that process to help scope the work that would be required. So as it stands, we are making reference to them already, so we wouldn't be holding up the use of these documents in the science until such time that we put our procedural manual and update our policies in place.
Well, thank you very much. So we have the motion on the floor to receive this. And could I see a show of hands of approval for this? Any opposed? Okay, this motion's carried. Thank you very much. And CAO Sharma, if in your response to this correspondence, could you please add our appreciation to the TRCA for sending this along to us. Thank you very much. Item 4B is correspondence dated October 21st, 2021 from David Porterman, Director of Real Property Management, Air, Marine, Environmental Programs with Transport Canada. This is to do with the establishment of an eco park on Transport Canada's surplus land site in Niagara on the Lake. This is for receipt. And before I call the motion, I will ask if CEO Sharma has any comments to put this in context.
Thank you, Chair Mackenzie. No, I have no comments. This was a letter that was sent because Niagara Region Chair had requested, and Chair wrote a letter to the province, and this is just an acknowledgement to that.
All right, thank you very much. So I'd like this to be moved. Member Cridlin, you move this, and the seconder, Member Metcalf. All right, with you, John. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to receive. All in favor, please.
Chair Mackenzie, if I may.
Yes, Member Smith.
Just a quick question on this. I noted in the text of that letter, they talk about engaging with regional staff. I'm just curious, is NPCA staff also involved in this dialogue in any way?
Well, I'm going to pass your question, and it's a very good question, right back to our CAO. Chandra?
Thank you. Yes, through you, Chair Mackenzie, I can confirm that Niagara Region staff consulted with us initially when they were investigating potential opportunities for creating this as an eco park.
Okay, well, that answer your question, Member Smith.
Yeah, it sure does. So am I right to assume at some point we'd be getting a report or more feedback on this then as it moves forward? Is that a good assumption?
We meet with Niagara Region team on a regular basis. We are meeting with them monthly now, so I can certainly make sure that any updates come to the board as they emerge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Smith. And so I'll call the vote to be received. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. And just on a side note, Member Smith, I do remember you bringing this subject to our attention originally, and I know you and many others will be pleased to hear as to how this process moves forward. It's a piece of land in central Niagara. Okay, item 4C, correspondence dated November 5th, November 21 from Nicholas Fisher, Policy and Planning Officer. Conservation Ontario's comments on the Minister's order for temporary suspension of protection upon listing of black ash under the Endangered Species Act and amendments to Ontario Regulation 242/08. We have this before us, and I will ask if they're present, Jeff Vercade or Tim Frolick, if there are any comments to put this into context for our watershed before I call the motion for remover. Mr. Vercade, I see there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, board members. I'd be happy to speak to this, and I know you noted Kim Froelich, who I had discussions with this as well. And I'm not sure if she's on here, so after I give you some context on this, she's available for questions potentially too if she hung around from the staff introductions. But I would say, as most board members know, the Endangered Species Act is an act to identify and protect species at risk in their habitat and promote stewardship for its recovery. Species get identified by a committee. That committee earlier in this year identified black ash. Black ash is actually very common and abundant in Ontario, but this is anticipating the threat due to the ash borer. So what the ministry is proposing here through this generic or this move is to actually suspend restrictions for 2 years as it goes on the list, so that they can develop a plan for recovery and actually look at a strategy for best protecting it, as we know that this is coming around. So Conservation Ontario comment on that. They acknowledge, and they actually added a nice recommendation there, that they should be looking at some supplemental and complementary protocols for actually assessing the health of black ash. And they also noted to the ministry that in spite of the suspension, that the expectations would still be there, that any activities around black ash would still be needed to entered into the online registry with their associated mitigation measures and whatnot. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. I'd like to call for a motion to accept this piece of correspondence. Can I have a mover? Member Brady, second by Member Foster. And all in favor? Thank you very much. Motion carried. Item 5, we have a presentation, PowerPoint presentation by Mr. Sean Michael Steffen, manager of Watson and Associates Economists Limited, the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Parks and Recreation Services fee review. And this item is for receipt. And I would ask if Mr. Steffen is with us today. And I don't have there. I have your video now. Can you hear us, Sean Michael?
Morning. Yes, I can hear you fine.
Good. You may proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much. If you just give me an okay. And the presentation is sharing on your end.
Okay. Sean Michael, I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but I'm going to ask Mr. Beval Grant, did you get Sean Michael's audio okay? Or Kevin?
We'll see what we can do.
welcome back. Sorry, there's been a technical interruption in the meeting, and now we're going to hear a presentation from Sean Michael Stefan on the Parks and Recreation Services fee review. Mr. Stefan, please go ahead.
Very much. As an introduction, our firm Watson Associates Economist was retained by the authority to undertake a fee review to look at the full cost of providing parks and recreation services and to make fee recommendations to move towards full cost recovery levels. The fee review included not only the parks and recreation services, but also the plan review and permitting services that NPCA provides. However, that component of the review does not form part of the recommendations being reviewed today. And as well to identify for you that the type of review that we're undertaking is very similar to a number of other reviews we've undertaken for other conservation authorities in Ontario, as well as for over 45 other municipalities in Ontario in terms of those user fee reviews that we've been involved with. So the part of the driver for why this review is undertaken at this time is twofold. One is in response to the recent changes to the Conservation Authorities Act over the past few years, which we'll discuss in a little bit more detail, and then the subsequent release of Ontario Regulations 686-21 and 687-21 last month. And then the second part in terms of the rationale for the fee review is that the authority has not previously undertaken a comprehensive assessment of the full cost of service for the parks and recreation activities. Two prime objectives within the fee review are to look at the full cost of service and then ultimately the fee recommendations to recover those costs. Within the full cost assessment, we wanted to have regard for was identifying the cost for mandatory programs and services versus non-mandatory programs and services. And so we'll speak to this in a little bit more detail in terms of how this is informed by the legislation. But broadly, the mandatory programs and services would include the land care for passive conservation parks, which we'll refer to as passive recreation. And in terms of active recreation programs and services, those would be those other programs provided at the 41 NPCA conservation parks. And then with the fee recommendations, so when looking to recover the full cost of the active recreation programs and services, the recommendations are to move to those full cost recovery levels by January 1st of 2024, which is the regulatory transition date that we'll talk about a little bit further. Conforming with the underlying legislation, making sure that the recommended fees are defensible, and then as well in developing those recommended fees, making sure that we're having regard for stakeholder interests, the affordability of different user groups, and then as well reflecting industry best practices in terms of the fee structures themselves. So, as I mentioned before speaking to the findings of this study, I did want to spend a few minutes reviewing some of the changes to the legislation and how they are impacting conservation authorities' abilities to fund programs and services in the future. And so the changes to the Act have been made primarily through the Building Better Communities and Conservation Watershed Act in 2017 and the More Homes, More Choice Act in 2019. Some of the significant changes in terms of the definition of programs and services and how they can be funded were that the programs and services that conservation authorities provide would be grouped into three main categories, those being mandatory programs and services that can be funded through the municipal levy, non-mandatory programs and services that would still be funded through the municipal levy, but only if provided on behalf of a municipality through a memorandum of understanding or a service level agreement. And then authorities were still allowed to provide other programs and services that they wish to provide. However, those would need to be funded through self-generated revenues. And so with the release of the two recent regulations being 68621, which provided further clarity and detail around the mandatory programs and services, and 68721, which outlines the timing and transition plans, as well as provisions for agreements being released in, as I mentioned, October of this year. That informs the scope of this fee review in terms of what are the mandatory parks and recreation services to be provided, and then what would need to be funded through the municipal levy. And so when the Conservation Authorities Act was initially amended around the definition of those programs and services, the conservation and management of lands was identified as a mandatory program and service, but a number of questions existed around what specific activities that are provided on conservation lands could be funded through the levy and which would become a self-generated revenue funding activity. And so with the recent regulations, some more clarity has been provided in terms of what we're calling passive recreation and those activities that could be funded through the municipal levy. And so the regulation identifies that programs and services to maintain any facilities, trails, or other amenities that support public access and recreational activities in conservation authorities that can be provided. This is the key without the direct support or supervision of staff employed by the authority or another person or body. So providing the direction on what types of activities, if we're calling passive recreation or land care for passive recreation parks, could be funded through the municipal levy, with those other what we're calling active recreation programs and services would need to be funded through self-generated revenues. And then with regards to regulation 68721 that provides the transition timing and process around complying with the required funding structures, the immediate next steps in terms of the first phase of transition plans is that by February 28th of next year, all authorities will be required to prepare detailed inventories of all programs and services that are provided, classify those programs and services into the groupings of mandatory and non-mandatory programs and services, and as well identify what the anticipated and historical costs of service are and what the funding sources were as well. And so in relation to this undertaking, these changes suggest there'll be a much greater need to understand how resources are deployed to substantiate the funding needs for all programs and services, and with a much greater need for full cost accounting principles and transparency in the determination of the fees and charges that are imposed for the non-mandatory programs and services. And then lastly, around the legislative changes, the one outstanding piece of legislation that's anticipated potentially later this year is a further regulation around the municipal levy. And so the Conservation Authorities Act identifies that conservation authorities can fund the overhead and support costs through the municipal levy. However, there's anticipated there will be further clarification provided through the forthcoming municipal levy regulation. And so in that regard, a preliminary assessment of the overhead and support costs, such as the cost of the CAO and board and corporate services department, has been undertaken as part of this review. However, based on the forthcoming municipal levy regulation, there may be adjustments to that determination, as well as how those costs may need to be included within the proposed fee recommendations over the transition period to 2024. So then moving on to the methodology and process that we followed in undertaking this fee review. So the activity-based costing approach that we utilized was to first, on the left-hand side of the illustration, to define what were the full cost of service components. And so that includes in the bottom portion the direct operating costs of the various conservation area parks and for the programs and services provided therein, as well as the capital replacement costs for the infrastructure utilized within those areas. On the top left-hand portion, you can see the box indicating indirect overhead costs. Those have been, as I mentioned, calculated. However, they have not at this point been included in the full cost of service assessment. So based on the full cost of service, in the green boxes, we then defined what were the various active recreation programs and services versus the passive recreation programs, and we'll talk on the next slide about how those or which the various active recreation programs and services were that were defined for the purpose of this review. And so based on a fairly detailed review with staff, we developed resource utilization drivers to allocate those direct operating and capital costs to the various programs and services to then inform on the bottom part of the illustration what are those costs related to land care for passive recreation that can be funded through a municipal levy. And then in terms of the cost for the active recreation programs and services, what are the characteristics and utilization of those programs and services to inform the full cost of those programs on a per participant or service basis to then inform the full cost user fee recommendations. So the total annual cost then of providing the active and passive recreation services is $4 million. That cost about 80% related to the direct operating costs and about 20% for the annual capital replacement cost of existing infrastructure. We can see in the dark blue section of the pie chart that about 35% or $1.4 million relates to land care for passive conservation parks, being costs that could continue to be funded through municipal levy after January 1st, 2024. And then in the green sections of the pie chart are the categories of active recreation that were defined for this review. And so the cost of those various programs and services totaling about $2.6 million, with the most significant allocation of those costs being to the camping programs at about $1.1 million per year, about 28% of the annual cost, and conservation parks day use at the 4 active recreation parks, representing about 12% of the annual cost of service, or just under $470,000. And for the active recreation costs of $2.6 million annually, the current fees that are in place are anticipated to recover about 84% of those costs, or about $2.2 million per year, meaning that currently there's a funding gap of about $418,000 that would not be eligible to be funded through the municipal levy after January 1st, 2024, being that regulatory transition date for when authorities must comply with the new requirements around the funding of conservation authority programs and services. So what does that mean then in terms of fee recommendations? So overall, across the board, that would mean that there need to be approximately a 19% increase in the current Parks and Recreation fees that are imposed to close that funding gap. And so a few of the things that we need to consider when making fee recommendations to improve or close that cost recovery gap is the market sensitivity around those fee increases, because what we want to have regard for is the potential for a cyclical impact of having increased fees resulting in decreased utilization and therefore decreased revenue that would continue to erode the improved cost recovery that you're trying to achieve. And so having regard for the market sensitivity of those fees, the competitiveness of those fees with comparative service providers in the general geographic area, whether those be from other conservation authorities or private service providers, has been important in assessing the full cost fee recommendations to have some regard for are they still competitive within the broader market, and would we anticipate that there would be a negative impact on utilization as a result of those fees. And so to implement then the recommendations around the 90% increase overall, the specific recommendations are provided in the staff report. And what is being proposed is to phase in that increase over 3 years between 2022 and 2024, being just over a 6% increase per year applied to all fees. And what this would ensure is that by 2024, again being that regulatory transition date, that the full cost of service for the active recreation services would be recovered. The transition would mitigate any significant one-time fee increases, and as well with these increases, they would remain within the range of fees imposed by comparative service providers currently. Some of the other rationale around the phase-in of the fee increases is that it will allow for staff to monitor the impacts on service utilization with the fee increases, as well as impacts on utilization around COVID-19 pandemic impacts and coming out of that pandemic as well, and looking in addition at minimizing the impacts on families, seniors, and students. And then lastly, to note that in addition to these fee increases identified here being the 6% annually, that any inflationary costs in the authority's budget would also need to be added to the annual fee increases. So with those recommendations, there are no proposed changes to the structures themselves, with the exception of the fee that is imposed for the day use parks. And so currently the fee for day use is a per visitor fee with a maximum vehicle fee, which is equivalent to the fee for 3 adults. And then in addition, the authority does provide annual membership fees as well. The proposed fee structure for day use is being changed to align more so with what is imposed in neighboring CAs such as Hamilton Conservation Authority, and as well to provide better alignment with proposed fees for gated entry when no attendant is on duty. And so the proposed fee structure would be a fee per vehicle and 1 driver, and then an additional charge per additional passenger, while maintaining a maximum vehicle charge consistent with the current fee structure. When looking at this proposed change, the fee structure has considered the profile of different visitor groups, so whether that be families versus couples or individuals. And so with this change, there will be higher impacts on the day use fees for individuals and couples than there would be for groups and families. However, what is being proposed is that those impacts would continue to be mitigated through the promotion of the annual memberships and the value that is offered through those memberships versus day use fees. And then so some additional further considerations with regards to the fee recommendations are that dependent on the forthcoming municipal levy regulation, there may be adjustments required to fund a share of the indirect overhead support costs of the organization. And then as well, there could be some changes to the assessment of the annual capital lifecycle funding obligations the full cost assessment. And so the regulations identify that asset management plans will be required for water control and erosion control infrastructure. However, to the extent the authority undertook more detailed asset management plans and condition assessments of other authority infrastructure, that may identify a different level of capital funding needs that may require adjustments to the fee recommendations as well. So then, in terms of next steps around regulatory compliance in relation to this undertaking, as I mentioned, the regulations provide the timelines for compliance with the components of the mandatory programs and services, as well as transition plans. This review that we're going to take in regards to parks and recreation services provides a starting point towards meeting many of those requirements. One being that there is a conservation area strategy that is required to be prepared, and within that strategy, it's required that there's an identification of the mandatory and non-mandatory programs and services provided on Conservation Authority land and the financing sources, as well as a preparation of a land inventory that identifies where active recreation programs and services are provided. So this fee review and full cost assessment addressing the majority of those requirements in that regard. And then as well, for all Conservation Authority programs and services, the requirement to classify those services into mandatory, non-mandatory, and other programs and services and estimate the costs and funding sources is being achieved through this review for the Parks and Recreation services, as well as the other component of the review for the plan review and permitting services that are provided. So then lastly, next steps in terms of the study process is to receive feedback on the proposed fee increases from the Board of Directors. The first phase of the staged implementations would occur on January 1st of next year. And then in review of the municipal levy regulation and the impacts on conservation parks and land care costs would subsequently occur with those impacts and any further adjustments to the fee recommendations prior to the regulatory deadline of January 1st, 2024 would then be reported back to the Board of Directors. That does conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that there are.
Sean Michael, thank you very much. Members, before we start with questions with Sean Michael, I'd just like to mention that after his presentation, we'll be skipping a few items and getting right to report item 8A, which is a report on conservation area fees. Adam Christie will be presenting that report. So there's going to be sort of two channels that we're on, but we'll start with Sean Michael. And Sean Michael, I'm hoping that you will be able to stay with us until we conclude Adam Christie's report as well. And I think our first speaker here is Member Houston. Member Houston, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I actually want to suggest, would it not be more prudent to perhaps also put the report on the floor so we can entertain questions to both the presenter and staff at the same time? Or is there a presentation by staff that's going to accompany the report?
Thank you very much for that suggestion. And I will just check with Mr. Christie Adam, you've got a presentation to go with your report, do you?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a verbal really to the report.
Okay, well, if there's no objection, I think what we'll do is move right to Adam's report, and then we'll have both Adam and Sean Michael available to us to respond to questions depending on which field the ball lands in. Okay, Adam, so we're going to move to report number FA 63 2021. I'm sorry, it's report FA 64 2021 conservation area fees. This is for approval. And the report from Sean Michael, that report is for receipt. And I think before we'll deal with both motions after Mr. Christie's report. Question, if that seems all right. Adam, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's a report on the floor for the NPCA board to consider and approve the proposed 2022 conservation area rates. The summary of the report is to take Watson Associates recommendations and for staff to put a 6.1% increase to all conservation area programs and services for 2022. The recommendation is to not include an inflation increase for this year, and the reasons being to support equitable access to our conservation areas across the watershed, while reducing the economic burden of COVID-19 on families, remaining within a competitive bracket alongside our neighboring conservation authorities. Be happy to take any questions.
I have a question.
All right, just one.
Was Diane finished? I think Diane was before me.
Yes, just 1 second, Member Woodhouse. Member Houston, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Member Woodhouse. I appreciate that. So I appreciate you considering both these items at the same time, because I think I've got lots of questions. So I just want to go back to the presentation where I think what we determined is we received guidance on what is a mandatory versus non-mandatory program and service. And we've identified that we have about 2.6 million in our active recreation, where, sorry, can you bring that slide up one more time? The one with the pie chart? Okay, I found it. So we've got 2.6 million, which is active registration, of which there's a funding gap of 418,000 that we would have traditionally funded through the levy. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. So we're now having to try and deal with how do we fund that gap of 418,000. However, you also said that we haven't received the legislation relating to the levy regulation. So is this, would we not, are we just anticipating there's going to be a gap, or do we know that we can't collect these funds through the levy without that levy guidance?
Yeah, so these, just to clarify, these costs do not include any of the overhead and support costs of the authority. So these are the direct costs of providing the active recreation programs and services that we do not anticipate the municipal levy regulation having any impact on. The municipal levy regulation, we're anticipating, or yes, we shouldn't say we're anticipating, we don't yet know specifically what it will outline, but to the extent there's an implication in terms of a requirement to fund a share of those overhead and support costs through the active recreation programs and services that they benefit, then these fee recommendations would need to be adjusted.
Okay, so when do we anticipate receiving the levy regulation? Maybe Shalinder has an answer for that.
Yeah, to you, Chair, I can answer that question. We are anticipating end of year, as far as I know. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. And then in terms of the fees, I think I read these. I mean, we're all of a sudden we're going to be charging a lot of fees. Well, fees for things that we never charged for before. What I'm seeing is we had, let's say, free admission, and now we're charging per card. And I'm, looking at that, and I'm thinking of, the socioeconomic determinants of health and how important our green spaces are for people's health and well-being. And that was well documented over the last couple of years. And I think that the people who are really going to be disadvantaged by that are people who are low income. They'll probably more significantly represent marginalized communities. And it will also be seniors who are very cost sensitive to things like this. These are the people who I anticipate are going to come back at me very upset that they now have to pay for something that they never had to pay for before. However, I also recognize we're in the unique position where we're now not able to collect monies from a traditional funding source that we had always done for these, these important access to some of our resources. So I'm wondering, I feel like we're in a bit of an impossible situation here. I see why we need the fees. However, is there any way that we could try and come up with some type of creative solution so that we can make our properties more inclusive for parts of our communities that are sensitive to, like paying $10 or $20 for a carload of people to access our sites might prevent them from the sites altogether. So I'm wondering, like, is there something we can do to try and come up with some creative ways to make sure we can make it inclusive for people who are very sensitive to even small fees like this?
Member Houston, I'd just like to rephrase your question a little bit and then direct it to Adam Christie. But Member Houston, I heard you say that there's going to be some fees added to activities that in the past you haven't charged for. So I want to make sure that we're dealing with this clearly. And so, Adam, are we looking, first of all, are we looking at implementing fees for anything that we presently do not charge for?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair, there are no additional fees that we are adding that we have not previously charged for. The only change really that I think Member Houston is referring to is the structural change in day use. And I completely agree, and we put in and implemented some strategies to support this. One, we'll put together a communication for the new year about our membership passes that remain a modest increase and support a family coming into all of our conservation areas. Number two, we have 37 passive conservation areas that continue to not have a fee to any of them that include passive recreation. And the last one is a program we're really proud of with, it's called the Library Pass, that we have put our membership passes with 9 out of our 12 municipalities to support, anybody that wants to come that can't quite maybe afford to be able to use these passes to get into some of our active conservation areas. So those are kind of the 3 strategies I guess we're using for this.
Okay, so a follow-up then. So we're dealing with report 64-21, right? Yes. Okay, and then on Appendix 1, and maybe I'm not understanding this, but as an example, under Balls Falls day use, it has 2021 vehicle and driver, I see no amount, and then in 2022, it says $13.
So, sorry, and through you, Chair. So previously and last year, we did our day use by admission. So if two people came in, last year it would be $8 per person to come into Balls Falls Conservation Area, which would result in a $16 overall fee. Next year, just due to the automatic gate and to make it work more sense, it's very similar to what Hamilton Conservation Authority does, is that it is a $13 vehicle person fee and an extra $4.50. So it would come to $17.50 instead of the $16. So it's just more of a structural than something we haven't charged in the past.
Okay, so sorry, I read these as where there was no amount there. I read that as we didn't charge before and now we're implementing a fee. So we're structurally changing our fees to try and recover some of our costs, is what you're saying.
And also just operational with the automatic gate system we have, an admission style no longer kind of works. It also, the fee structure we have also would support active recreation to avoid people just coming by themselves, carpooling, different kind of strategies as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification.
Okay, Member Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions. I guess for me, this is a bit of deja vu. We used to go to the drive-in. We'd hide people in the trunks of our cars to avoid the fees. Anyway, that being said, I would trust that we're not going to need to hire consultant services again for this, because we should have, as a result of this work, we should have a good understanding, first of the formula, secondly, because of the cost, we know what the cost is going to be, and we can just apply the new charges annually instead of missing these instead of letting this stuff build up again. I know we have to make an adjustment, but I would trust that would be the case for cost avoidance. In terms of mental health and the whole issue around, we know how much of a benefit the health aspect is for people with mental challenges, being able to get into nature and being able to experience these facilities, that it's, in a lot of ways, it's a treatment, becomes a treatment park for some of these folks, and I think that with that in mind, it seems to me that the reason we're putting these funds on is because we need to be able to generate enough money to be able to do the work that needs to be done, plain and simple. And I would think that because this involves so much, and I think there's been some studies done. Those who work in this field would probably be more able to talk to this in length than me, but I think there's been a number of studies done as to how beneficial these facilities are and areas. So I would think that we should be making an appeal to the region, the regional health department, as well as the provincial health department in terms of funding this from a mental health standpoint. Because of the terrible situation we're in with this epidemic, as I'll call it, it seems to me that this would be in the best interest of our levels of government to participate and actively fund a lot of these costs associated with this because of the benefits that it would have downstream. Could you comment on that, Adam, please, that aspect?
Thank you for the question, and it's an excellent idea, and certainly we agree with you. There is certain programs that are going on. I believe it's called Parks and Recs program that's in Hamilton that they're doing, and I think across the country there's some different chatter about this initiative as well. We will certainly keep our eyes and ears open to anything around that, but I certainly agree.
Well, it's not about keeping our eyes and ears open. I mean, I think it's an initiative that we as a board may want to support our staff in pursuing this. We can sit by and wait for a lot of things to happen in life, but unfortunately they just don't walk on our door, drop on our doorstep. So I would Mr. Chairman, through you and through the board, encourage a motion to direct staff to put some form initiative forward in terms of us being able to be a partner in helping with this health crisis that we're currently going through in this, well, it seems around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodhouse. And I'll get back to you. We have a few speakers. I see Member Cridlin and then Member Brady. Member Cridlin, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. When we, this is a regulatory requirement, sadly, but how soon would we know? Because we are using obviously our past experience, which has been anything but stable in the last couple of years. But to know that we are actually going to be successful with the 6.1 and 6.1. So can we have a sense perhaps from Adam that, maybe come June or July, we would know that we're reasonably on target for this 6.1 recovery? We can't predict what behavior is going to be like. I know we've taken what seems to be amazing steps, for having this come together strategically through the consultants report. But if we're going to be monitoring this, could you just talk briefly about how soon we might know that we're going to be on plan with what we've got proposed here? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Cridlin. Member Brady.
Hi, Adam. I think I understand this, but tell me if I'm correct. If I walk into a park, it's free. Yes or no?
Through you, Chair. Which one, Member Brady?
Well, that's my point. You've suggested that there will be no additional fees provided, but the fees are based on a driver. Well, if there is no driver, how are you going to be basing that fee?
Sorry, can you rephrase? Can you say the question again? I'm confused. I apologize.
Certainly. You told us that the fee will be based on a driver, okay, a car. If there is no car and there is no driver, how are you basing this fee?
Yeah, if there is no vehicle, there is no fee. So somebody can come in at any time to all of our conservation areas and use it if there is no vehicle.
Okay. Does that also apply to a bicycle?
Correct.
Okay. So bicycles can access any of our facilities for free, as well as if you want to walk into the facility. So if you live down the street, you want to walk into a facility, you can do it for free.
We certainly encourage everybody of those locals to for our membership passes is really what they're supposed to be doing. All the walkers that people use the parks on a daily basis is through our membership program.
That didn't answer the question. If I'm living down the street and I want to walk into the park, it's for free, correct?
Technically, yes.
Okay, good. So there are certain parks right now, Morgan's Point, for example, where you can drive into Morgan's Point, park your car, and go for a walk there, and there is no fee. Does that remain?
Correct.
Okay, so all of the parks that we have right now, that there are no fees, there will not be a fee attached to it. You're not going to do what the Niagara Parks Commission is doing and start putting access points on all their little parking spaces.
Correct.
Good. So in respect to the questions that Diana was raising, and I thought they were very good, there still are many ways to access our parks which don't have a fee associated with this. And there will not be any additional fees attached to those. However, the ones that you have had a fee in the past, they will be going up slightly.
Slightly, correct.
Correct. And that's great. I understand that. So you changed up the process in terms of how you get in because for operational purposes, and I understand that. But it does create a benefit for larger groups. So if a larger group goes into a park, I would assume a larger group could be, a family of 6. They are now going to be paying a little bit more, but on a proportional basis a little bit less.
Yeah, the only change will be the 6.1 increase from last year. There'll be no further fee structure for them.
Okay, so we are in fact providing, if you do what Mel used to do, to go to the drive-in, you can get into the park. You'll still be paying for it, but you'll actually be encouraging that kind of activity.
Correct, due to like the max car fee that we kept.
Right.
So that helps.
Okay, so why I put this out is because I know we're being listened to by everyone else. I want to make sure that the public is aware that they don't need to phone Diana and complain about that they have to pay additional fees that they did in the past, because in fact, if they could go in the past without paying a fee, they can go now. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brady. Member K-Wall. You're on mute, Ken. Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I just want to go back to agenda item 5A, the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, sir.
For clarification here, it says that this is being brought forward for receipt. But in the presentation, it actually talks about approval of fee increases. So I want to be clear that if we receive this 5A, we are indeed approving the fee increases that are in that presentation. Is that correct?
Not from my viewpoint, Member K-Wall. I see us with item 5A by receiving that report, and by item 8A, which is Adam Christie's report, which is recommending some fee increases, and that report is for approval. So we're going to have two separate motions, and the second motion on Adam's report will be dealing with the fee increases. So I don't see a problem with receiving the presentation by Mr. Stefan.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So in the presentation, it says that active recreation can actually be funded two ways. It could be funded by user fees, or it could be funded by the Conservation Authority negotiating an MOU with the municipality. It appears that we have chosen the option of increasing the user fees and not attempting to create a MOU with the municipality. Can you help me understand that rationale for why we chose not to do that?
Okay, I'm going to take a swing at this, and I'm going to require the backup of our CAO or Mr. Christie if I hit a foul ball. We have four main revenue generating conservation areas that require an entrance fee or user fee for them. The other conservation areas, the 37, what we call passive conservation areas, do not have a user fee at this time, and those will be supported by the municipal levy. I don't remember in Mr. Stefan's presentation, and I was having problems with internet, so please forgive me, mention of MOUs, because MOUs would have to be dealt with one of the individual municipalities in which a conservation area finds itself. CAO Sharma, do you want to add to that, please, for clarification for Member K-Wall's question?
Thank you, Chair McKenzie, and yes, you are correct. So just to clarify, active recreation parks do not fall under Category 2 services or programs of the Conservation Authority. They fall under Category 3 programs and services, active recreation park, where we are generating revenues. And for those, you cannot enter into an MOU with a municipal partner. However, what happened with the current regulation that you just saw on October 7th, which was a welcome change, is now part of the land care work and parks. So the 37 parks that Sean just mentioned and Adam just mentioned, the land care and passive recreation can now go under that mandatory program. So they are now category 1 service, which we can levy the municipality for. The MOU and SLAs in level 2 services are services where, just let me give you an example of forestry, tree planting, watershed planning, data for watershed plans. Those kind of services are under category 2 services or other capital works. Now, talking about parks, if we consider ourselves as the provider of regional recreational park experience, and we just talked about that eco park that you talked about, and if the region wishes to have the conservation authority manage that for them, then that becomes a category 2 service because we do not own that land, but we act as a service provider to the municipality. I hope that helps understand the differentiation between all of those.
Okay, it's not clear, but I'll accept your answer. So my concern here is that the 19% that's in here is really the minimum amount, because it talks about the ability to add on inflationary costs, and we're currently seeing that inflationary costs are starting to rise. I heard what you said, Adam, that that's not the intent to do that in 2022, but we are actually talking about recommendations that span over multiple years. There is also the possibility of adding on overhead costs. So in all likelihood, that 19% is going to be significantly higher. So I have real concerns with that. I thought Member Hewson expressed it very well, and the concerns about, broadening the appeal of what we provide in terms of open space, green space, the socioeconomic benefits, and the health benefits. A month ago we were celebrating the launch of a new strategic plan, which spoke to all of these things. I think it would be a real shame that one of the first items we do is approve what will be interpreted as many as a barrier to accessing those lands by putting forward such significant increases. And I know people are talking about it's only 6% here, et cetera, et cetera. But if you actually go to the day rate for one individual adult that goes from $8 to $13, that's a 60% increase in 1 year, okay? I think that is actually outrageous. And so I think there's got to be a better way. And I like what Mel was trying to say, but we need to go back and take another look at what other options are available to us to fund these costs, and not just put it strictly on the backs of our users, and not just strictly use the excuse that, well, it's legislation and we're required to do that by legislation. So too bad. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Jan, thank you. I'm having some internet problems here. Grant, can you hear me?
I can hear you very clearly, sir.
Okay. Member Foster, can you hear me?
We can. You're loud and clear.
You might be able to hear me, but I can't hear you. Could someone's?
Yeah, you're loud. You're loud.
Anybody?
Yeah. You're loud and clear, Bruce.
Okay, thanks. I was just not receiving anything back. And I apologize, Member K-Wall. I missed some of your comments. I'm hoping that staff provided a satisfactory answer to you. But you were leaning towards being not approving this fee schedule, and I may have missed concluding remarks of yours. Are you making a motion in any regards?
No, I did not, Chair.
Thank you, Member K-Wall. Are there any further speakers? on this subject. Member Foster.
Yeah, just a quick question to the CAO. So, you're getting from everyone here that this is fairly significant, that that's coming in and through, and it's changes to where we're going with these, and I'll my bias on these things as well is that taxpayers have already paid for these places, and I'm really not a big fan of fees that are coming into place with any of them. So that's my background bias within it. But I'm sorry, did we run this through the Finance Committee ahead of time? I can't remember.
I don't believe so. CEO Sharma, can you correct me if I'm wrong?
No, you are correct. No, this did not go to the Finance Committee. It's not part of their work plan. So that is why staff didn't bring it there. We generally bring cost of park services to the board directly every year. And that's the report in front of you. We asked for a cost of living increase of 2% generally. But this year, what we are saying is instead of that 2% increase, we clear this backlog. We've never done this type of work. As an organization who is responsible for fee-for-service work and generating revenue through parks to offer good services to the community for a cost, we should have done it long back, but we are now catching up to many years of having not done that. And the $418 that you see there is not the cost that we are trying to increase to gain more revenue. Just so you know, it's the current gap that we will not be able to cover through levy. And I also want to ask board members to take a look at the table that's in the report. It's easier to talk about percentages, but when you're talking $1, $2, percentages are non-material. We have been so careful and so cognizant at the staff level that the cost increases are fair to a low-income family that's coming to the park, to a senior, to a student. Beyond that, we are already, and to answer Member Houston's question, working on various strategies to include social aspect of our work. You will hear more from staff later during my update that for the holiday trail, we are having a community day. We have 300, I think, participants or families registered free of cost to bring them to our area without charging them a cost. We are doing that. I was talking to Member Mackenzie. We want to do on September 30th an Indigenous Day, where we will open our parks to communities to come free of cost. So, I mean, what we said in the strategic plan, we're living up to that. We will do it. The cost increase of $1 or $2 that you see on that chart is for an individual or a single person who comes in a car to the park. And it's that $400 that we will not be able to recover through levy. So I just want to kind of give this context, and what you're saying, we all agree. And staff are very sensitive to those issues, and we constantly create programming and strategies to address that social gap. We have for all intentions to work with the health sectors to look at where we can establish those partnerships to bring the health benefit. And like Adam said at the beginning, 37 of our properties are still available for people to enjoy, and they're the best ones. Morgan's Point, St. John's. If for health reason people want to go take a hike, local neighborhood individuals, yes, they can all do that. So it's important to understand the context here and what is being proposed rather than looking at 60% or 90%. Just wanted to give that context. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other speakers? Yes, Member Wright and then Member Houston.
It's kind of a silly question, but what happens if the additional fees don't actually cover the costs, so you end up with a deficit at the end of the year next year? How does it get recovered, or what happens if actually your predictions are wrong, so there's still a gap? I'm just curious, what does the regulation say the consequences are if you run a deficit? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wright. I'm going to pass that on to Lise. Lise Gagnon, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. If I can just, the consultant was engaged to give us a sense of how much under current operating models we are recovering of the costs that we incur to deliver and make these services available. That was the original intent, is that if we were going to move forward with a full cost recovery model, what would it cost us to do that? So we've been all along pretty much operating these parks and these services under that premise, so that we just didn't know all along how much it was costing us. Now we do. Now we know that that gap that we've always been paying for, which is $418,000 for passive parks, or for active parks, pardon me, is already incurred. It's a sunk cost. It always has been there. Now we know the size of it, and we're trying to close that gap in anticipation of the new regulations coming down, whereby we won't be able to recover those costs or shift them elsewhere. So it's an element of trying to be prudent and position ourselves in such a way as to make sure that we can continue to deliver these services going forward by recovering our costs in revenue generating areas. So it's not additional costs, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It's costs that we already have been incurring. And it's things like, to give you a for instance, it's so we cut grass at active parks, and there's a cost of cutting grass for the entire section, the entire park. So that cost is now separated between the active park and the passive park, so that the passive side of it, because each of the active parks does have a passive component to it, we would now be able to classify as mandatory, whereas the active side we can't, which is going to determine what we can and can't levy for going forward once the regulations come down. Now, I'll ask Chandra to make sure that I've interpreted all of the information correctly in terms of the potential regulations coming down. They are not down yet when it comes to this. There are elements of that regulation that we're actively looking for. They mentioned the potential in some of the discussion papers about allowing a component of amortization on fixed assets to allow conservation authorities to rebuild the asset base and maintain it in a state of good repair. That would be wonderful. So there is still a question mark there. And insofar as whether we don't completely recover the costs, if the 6.1% is not sufficient, we're already carrying those costs, so it will become a cost reallocation exercise and not a deficit. I'm hoping that answers your question.
And Member Hewson, second time speaker.
Sorry, I appreciate you letting me speak again. I have more questions after hearing all the dialogue. But I think that, Member Wright is right. I mean, it's basic, economic policy. A demand curve is, as you increase the price, the demand for something decreases. So it's certainly possible that we may not see the numbers that we're trying to recover. But just another suggestion, I was thinking about through things. I'm not sure if we've ever approached institutions or employers for perhaps employee or group memberships. That might be an opportunity to make perhaps increase revenues from a different model. And then the question Member Kewal brought up around MOUs. Who do we have? Like, if we need an MOU, is that with? Is that with the Niagara region? Is it with the specific municipality that the conservation area is in? Like, is there a potential we may have to have MOUs across, at least in Niagara, across 13 different municipalities? Or I'm hoping the answer is just the Niagara region, because that would make our lives a lot easier.
I'll start with that, Chandra, if I may, and then add on where I missed. The Conservation Authority has a number of MOUs. Ontario Power Generation is the first one that comes to mind. That's huge. There's little ones with the Hamilton Naturalist Club or the Grimsby Wetlands. That one doesn't involve any money. And Chandra, are there a number of others, I believe?
So through you, Chair, to Member Houston, the use and service level agreements that are part of the Conservation Authority Act going forward is with participating and funding municipalities, the upper tier. However, yes, so there's 3, and most conservation authorities, as part of this process, are also envisioning getting into MOUs with lower tier municipalities for services, because we will be developing a list of services for category 2 and category 3 services, like tree planting and other things, and data for watershed planning. So we do have MOUs with lower tier municipalities on planning services, plan review. Those will carry on or updated. So we may not have an MOU with all lower tier municipality. We may pick and choose, or they may pick and choose to work with us on specific things as service providers. So this gives us an opportunity to do that as well.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Any other further speakers? Member Rapley, are you putting up your hand or adjusting the camera? You're on mute. William.
No, everything's fine. I'm really impressed. We've got a lot of things to think about in the future. That's fine.
I'm going to go back to Member Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the fact is that we're going to be faced with this one way or the other. The government's taken an initiative that we're all aware of, and it behooves us to actually react to it in the best way possible. I'm suggesting that while we have to be realistic in terms of our costs and our ability to recover those costs, but I really believe that there's an opportunity here. And I think we're, you know, instead of worried about, you know, increasing fees here or there, I think there's ways in which we can actually use this and the service that we're providing, whether we have a memorandum of understanding with the region or with the federal or the provincial or federal government, whoever it is, in terms of supporting the services we provide through the assets in which we hold, and that is for the health and well-being of our communities. And I think that you know, you look at Bell Canada, for example, that they run millions and millions of dollars in ads about mental health, as does the OPG and other corporate partners that we could actually have a memorandum of understanding with, that they have available funds that are designated for these things, including within the budgets of the ministries of health and within the regional health department as well. So there's all these initiatives. It's a question of, do we want or should they be funding this initiative? This, to me, kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It eliminates the financial pressures that we would otherwise be facing, and our users wanting to make use of these assets, which rightfully so, Member Foster pointed out, was paid for by the public, but this is all public money anyway. So there's that, but I really believe that this is an opportunity for us to you know, be a partner in the aid of mental health, and also in the preservation and the you know, of our natural areas. So I think that if we looked at this, we could really find some real interesting financial opportunities to offset any of these pressures. In fact, I'm confident that if we put a good enough presentation forward to these various organizations and bodies, that we can generate enough revenue that we can actually maybe expand it. For example, here in Thorold on Lake Gibson, there's the Lake Gibson municipal property that's owned. It's a park, Melsport Lake Gibson Park. The region has property on DeQ Road as well, and there's a desire to make this entire parkway one unified piece as part with Ontario Power Generation. Now, that being the case, it's dead center in the Niagara region. The desire of these folks is that the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority are the ones that actually operates and runs it. So there's opportunities for partnership. I just don't want us to get stuck on, the fee aspect of things, because we have to be realistic here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Malcolm. Member, are there any other speakers? Member Beatty. You're on mute. Okay, thank you, Stu.
Question for Adam. Some years ago, we issued a report on the expansion of the 2 campgrounds at 2 of our facilities. Could we dust that off and have another look at what would be the present day costs of expanding those 2 the camping facilities is what I'm talking about.
Thank you for the question through you, Chair. And absolutely, Member Beatty, it's actually on our list this year. We have put operating consulting fees together to put together a scoping of both of those projects to bring to the board at a later date.
One of the things we really have to look at is generating dollars of not just the fee structure, but what kind of capital investment do we need to generate significant revenues, such as our campgrounds and our big, we have 4 big commercial areas that I don't think we've utilized to the extent that we could to generate funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Member Beatty. There are any other speakers now? Okay, Member Foster, I'm going to ask you if you could take the chair for a minute. I'd like to make some general comments or remarks.
Sure. So go ahead, Member McKenzie.
Thank you very much. I am thrilled at the discussion that has gone on today about our fee structure. In the previous years that I've been with this board, the fee schedule has hardly raised an eyebrow. And this is a healthy exercise. My compliments to staff for initiating or sparking this discussion by having to bring in a consultant from the outside. And I also wish to thank the members who have stressed the importance of mental health and physical natural space available to members of the public. And we are in, as you all know, very changing times when it comes to conservation authorities regulations, the Conservation Authorities Act. And I think our staff are well positioned and aware of the pressures that are coming at them. And they've been creative. And Holiday Trail is just one example. The virtual Falls Festival is another example. We find ourselves in an interesting position today, sandwiched, I'm going to say sandwiched between the Hamilton Conservation Authority to the west and their policies, and the Niagara Parks Commission to the east and their policies. The Hamilton Conservation Authority right now, their policy is leaning towards very strongly is that if there's a parking spot, you're going to have to pay to get that gate to open to allow you to use that parking spot on every one of their conservation areas where they have a business case for putting in a auto gate. And just in the last 2 years, this conservation authority has been discussing the possibility of putting in auto gates in some of our passive areas, because some of them generate the traffic that would make these areas, there would be a payback and net revenue for having an auto gate. But the discussion today, though, is leaning towards, wait a minute, we don't want to disadvantage the public by putting in these fees for areas that do not have fees today. And as we've heard, we have 37 of these passive conservation areas across our watershed. And the operative word there is across, because we have these non-passive areas right from east to west and north to south. We're scattered. So that puts us in a very interesting position in, do we remain those passive areas as free entry for the benefit of all of our members of the community? Or do we try to squeeze out every last cent? Now, with the involvement of the conservation areas regulations, the argument is, the discussion is very different today than it was 2 years ago because of how these areas are going to be funded. And I think there was a tremendous amount of wisdom, if I read the Conservation Authorities Act, in that non-revenue generating areas will be seen as a core part of our core mandate and funded by the municipal levy. So yes, there will be some serious discussions with our funding partners. And right now, in our situation, that's primarily the region of Niagara. And Member Woodhouse, you mentioned about, and others mentioned about mental health, physical health. And our CAO has made strong reference to working with mental health organizations, Department of Mental Health. She is reaching out in many different ways to bring this reality to home. She uses the example of a future eco park as a possible how to work together. I've had some discussions with Adam recently about passive areas and what can be done with them to upgrade them, and there is a report to be coming down the pipe on that. And so we got a lot of things to balance and look at, and I'd just like to thank everybody for their contributions to the discussion today, and I look forward to many more of these discussions because they have to be had. So thank you, Chair Foster, for taking on the chair. I would like it to take it back, if that's all right with you.
Certainly, you may. Yeah, please go ahead, Chair Mackenzie.
Thank you. Okay, so we have two motions on the floor. The first one is to receive the PowerPoint presentation by the consultant from Watson and Associates Economics. Can I have a mover, Member Houston, a seconder for that motion, Member Rapley? All in favor? Okay, that motion's approved. Now, the other motion that's on the floor is item 8A, the conservation area fees. This report is for approval. And can I have a mover for this? Member Steele moves it, a seconder. Member Shurton. Oh, Rob. Any discussion? Any further discussion, I should say. Member Smith.
Just to clarify, this vote then is to approve this, the fee increases.
Yes.
I know it's clarified already, but so can we, if we would like to add a modifier, how do we do that?
Well, I think you would suggest to make a friendly amendment and see if we can get a seconder for your friendly amendment. Well, first of all, we'd have to go back to the mover and to see whether it's considered friendly or not.
So I guess I'm asking, is there an actual motion that somebody could read out, or is it just is the motion?
The motion is to receive the report that Mr. Christie presented and it's in your agenda, which is listed the fee increases.
Okay, understood.
Okay, we're not finished yet. Member Houston?
Just real quick, can I refer an item to the Finance Committee to discuss diversifying our revenue streams and coming up with suggestions for the board, please?
Yes. Now, is this to do with the motion on the floor, or is this a separate?
It's related in that, we're looking at funding a gap by increasing our fees, but I'm asking, for some creative thinking around what our revenue streams are and how we can diversify them so we don't have to rely on increasing our fees to deal with financial mitigation strategies.
Thank you, Member Houston. Do you consider it fair if we were to discuss this under new business?
I'm referring this to the finance committee, so the staff can take that away.
Okay, CAO Sharma, do you consider we need a motion for what Member Houston is suggesting?
So thank you through you, Chair, and to Member Houston. Diversifying our revenues is a major priority, as you know, from the strategic plan already. Our staff team has been thinking creatively of how we do that to a variety of venues. And the foundation, role of foundation is also being considered in that, what role they can play to help us. And certainly we are working on a business plan for future years as we evolve and take into consideration all these other priorities we have as an organization. And I'm happy to bring the business plan, the funding report to the finance committee next year, yes, to seek their input.
Okay, thank you, Chandra. Is that satisfactory to you at this time, Member Houston?
I mean, I suppose I'm really suggesting a discussion item, so I don't necessarily think that a report needs to be developed and presented to that group. So it's simply a request for a discussion item to be referred to that committee.
Yes, we certainly hear that. And is there any other discussion before I call Member Shurton?
Just a point of clarity. The last couple of times Chandra has been speaking, the video is kind of broke up and her speaking is very quiet. I don't know if anybody else is sensing that. It's not loud like the others. So, and not that the others aren't important, but I take what Chandra says is more important than others. So we want her to be in top shape.
I hear you, and I agree. And Chandra hears you as well, and she will take appropriate action that she can. And thanks for speaking. Good to hear from you. Okay, I'm going to call the vote on the conservation area fees report. This report is for approval. We have it moved, we have it second, and all in favor. Opposed? Okay, I have 3 opposed. Member Kewald, Member Beatty, Member Smith. And if there's no other, then I'm going to declare this motion approved. Thank you very much. Okay, it's 11:24. We do have a delegation to present, Mr. Graveland, but I'm going to suggest we take a quick 5-minute break and come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, members and staff, members of the public. Thank you for your patience. We will begin resume the meeting now. And Mr. Gravelin, are you in attendance?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Well, yes, I can, sir. We can, sir. And thank you for your patience. You are recently information that you fortunately provided to us, or kind enough to provide to us, was circulated to members of the board. And our policy is with the delegations is that there is a 5-minute time available to you for your presentation. Are you prepared to start that, sir?
Yes, and Grant has a copy of the presentation. It's narrated, so I could keep it to 5 minutes. So I believe.
Thank you very much, and there will be time for questions afterwards. Grant or who's ever operating the technical aspect, you can start the presentation.
Thank you.
This is a presentation.
I want to thank NPCA staff.
By Mr. Guy Gravelin. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Who have been professional and responsive to all of our inquiries and forthcoming with information. None of the following comments should reflect on them or their role. Based on an October 29th email that we received from NPCA staff, the following statements communicate what we have believed to be true for some time now, but we're constantly told otherwise. That all of the work initiated and completed from July to mid-November has been done without informing the NPCA. without any permit submissions and approvals, and without any adherence to or respect for the policies and procedures required by the NPCA. OPG has been transparent and forthcoming with all of our inquiries. They informed us that they had provided the games with a temporary licensee agreement to make improvements to existing trails to improve safety for cyclists and recreational users. They informed us that there was no environmental analysis or environmental assessment that has been completed specific to this area. When asked to request a stoppage of the work, OPG responded by saying that they were satisfied that the games, as the licensee of its lands, has met its obligations, including collaboration with the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority to ensure the activity in the land is appropriately managed and approved under applicable regulation. Our observations: the games do not have the legal authority to build new trails on 12 Mile Creek. There has been no environmental impact assessment done and none planned. And OPG was misled to believe that NPCA had been working with the games and had their approval. We estimate that about 70% of the work done to date has been in areas where there were no established existing trails, no permits, no approvals, and in contravention to the agreement with OPG. And there is still much more trail development to come. This was not a case of not knowing. Local residents have worked hard to expose this, despite much pushback and public threats. If we had not, no one would be aware. We hope our time and effort will result in altering the current course. So why is NPCA now providing work permits instead of violation notices? The games want everyone to see them and Niagara as being good stewards of the environment. Yet when it comes to 12 Mile Creek, all of this is suddenly not relevant. They should be held accountable to an even higher standard. The word hypocritical comes to mind. Our observations, what the games are doing, tarnishes any environmental claims that is attached to the Niagara Games brand. We have been measured in our activities so far to not broadly expose what is happening for the sake of the games and of Niagara, but this may have to change. So what is really happening? Well, the games wanted full control to build their course and leave their legacy behind. They empowered a local mountain bike group to build it using their sweat equity. In return, it now becomes a mountain bike playground. The games and OPG will exit after August 22nd, 2022. And that time, the city hands over the maintenance of the trails to the mountain bike group. The local community is left with the consequences. Niagara's greenbelt takes another hit, and the natural environment will continue to be exploited as more trails are established. There is still plenty of time to get this right. There are several better locations with existing trails that meet or exceed the requirements by the games. There is no need to develop more trails at the expense of the environment. And our solution would introduce the use of modular mountain bike features that can be installed and then removed. The games can use this as part of their environmental sustainability platform, as the use of modular units will become a game changer in how to build future mountain bike courses with minimal environmental impact. So this is what we are asking the board to consider today. Issue a public statement on the findings of NPCA's investigation. Request that an environmental assessment be completed. Meet with OPG to review the terms of the licensee agreement. Inform OPG that at no time was NPCA working in collaboration with the games. And request that all work on the racecourse be stopped so the full review and assessment can be conducted. This is a David versus Goliath challenge for us, and we need someone to stand with us. We would like you to hold the games and their partners accountable for their actions and to a higher standard, and work with us as environmental advisors as we develop and implement a solution to do the right thing in a better way.
Thank you, Mr. Gravelin, for your presentation, and thank you for keeping it to the time limit that we asked you to do. Appreciate that. Before I ask for questions from the members, I would ask if Chandra, our CAO, Sharma, can put this into context in regard to the position or of the NPCA.
Thank you, Chair Mackenzie. I'll ask our director, Director Yates, to provide some context to the board members. I personally sympathize with the community. I understand their concern. I also know that our staff have worked in a very professional manner under on each step, undertaking careful review of information and followed the policy. So, I mean, we are here and I look forward to board direction on what else can be done here. Over to Director Yates.
Thank you, Chair Sharma, and through you, Mr. Chair, or sorry, CAA Sharma, and through you, Mr. Chair. The works on the bike trails within the 12-mile creek on the OPG lands came to our attention late September of this year through members of the public contacting NPCA staff. Our regulations officer followed our standard process in responding to the complaints by conducting a site visit and contacting Niagara 2022 Canada Summer Games to inform them that unauthorized works were being undertaken within NPCA's regulated area. Through our discussions with the Canada Summer Games representatives, it's our understanding that they had originally proposed the site for the bike racing trails at the Brock University property south of the OPG lands. However, the trails were not permitted uses within the Niagara Escarpment Plan. Therefore, an alternative site within the 12-mile Creek Valley was selected, and Canada Summer Games and OPG entered into a license agreement to facilitate the project. It's important to note that NPCA is not party to that agreement, nor were we involved in identifying the site. It's also our understanding that OPG had thought the NPCA regulated area was contained to the watercourse. Given that the bike trail works are being carried out by a third party on OPG lands, staff determined that a permit would be required from Canada Summer Games to bring the works into compliance with our Section 28 regulation and policies related to passive recreation within valley lands. The process to bring a site into compliance through a permit is only pursued if the works could be supported by our policies. While the NPCA is not able to issue a stop work order, we did advise Canada Summer Games to stop works on the trails until such time that the compliance matter was resolved. It came to our attention through a tips in mid-October that work had resumed, and we followed our standard compliance and enforcement process and issued a notice of violation at that time. Canada Summer Games did stop working on the trails and continued to work with our compliance and planning staff to follow the proper procedures to submit the required information for their permit application. To determine that the proposed works meets our policies, a natural areas inventory was submitted. Staff attended site visits with Canada Summer Games and the Niagara Trail Maintenance Group to walk the trail network, assess impacts, and plans of the trails were submitted that show the location of trail improvements and structures. Staff did observe minor vegetation removal as a result of the trail works, which was carried out with the use of hand tools. A requirement of our policies is a revegetation plan that demonstrates that there is no net loss of natural vegetation. After hearing the concerns from the public related to the vegetation removal, staff also required a restoration plan that identifies additional areas to plant and to contribute to the enhancement of the overall section of this valley. Staff concluded that the proposed trail works for the Canada Summer Games meets our Section 28 regulation and policies, and a permit was approved on November 12th to bring the site into compliance. And through this process, we have communicated with the community group and provided the information that we could. If Canada Summer Games and OPG had submitted a permit application before the beginning of the works and provided the required information to our satisfaction, staff would have supported that application as well. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the additional details on the process and procedures our staff followed to bring the site into compliance and permit the works in accordance with our policies. And staff are available to answer any questions that you may have.
I should add, if I may, that Steve Bauer is also on the call, and he is going to join me for any subsequent questions. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Gravelin. Members of the board, are there questions for the presenter and staff, and/or staff, I should say?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right, I'm going to start with Mr. K-Wall, Member K-Wall, then Member Woodhouse, then Member Smith. I'll start with Ken. If others have questions, put your hands up and I'll make a note. Go ahead, Member K-Wall.
Thank you, Chair. So this is really for our staff. Do our Valley land policies provide an option to ask for an environmental impact study? And if so, under what criteria?
Thank you. Through the chair, the particular policies related to passive recreation within the Valley land require that there are no adverse impacts on ecological features and functions. There's no specific requirement for an environmental impact assessment or study. However, in this case, there was a natural areas inventory that was completed by OPG for this area that was submitted, and our planning ecologist did walk the site with representatives from the Trail Maintenance Group and Canada Summer Games to look at those areas that were inventoried in relation to where the trails were being upgraded and enhanced. And our planning ecologist was satisfied that there would not be any negative impacts to the ecological features and functions as a result of the works.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I apologize. May I ask a question later then? Okay.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Gravelin, if there are questions directed to you, we'll certainly entertain them, and there will be an opportunity for you to comment further. Member Woodhouse.
Sorry, I just had a follow-up, Bruce.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Go ahead, Member K-Wall.
So thank you, Director Yates. So I heard what you said about it's not in our policy. Is it still an option that the NPCA has to ask for an environmental impact study?
Through the chair, yes, it is an option if we felt that based on our understanding of the works and the site conditions and characterization that an environmental impact study would be warranted and necessary. Our staff would have requested it. However, we felt with the inventory and the information that was provided within that and being out on site and walking the trails, the decision and opinion of our staff was that the impacts, there would not be any negative impacts to the features and the functions based on the information that was provided, and did not request any additional impact assessment work to be done.
Thank you, Director Yates. Chair, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Member K-Wall. Member Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In relationship to the inventory of plants and animals that live in that area, was there any identified or any plants or animals identified as endangered or threatened in that area?
Through the chair, yes, the full inventory did identify some significant habitats and species. Again, however, when I followed up with our planning ecologist, and my apologies, I'm not an ecologist, when they did see the location of where the trails and the structures were being placed, they were not impacting the habitats that were inventoried within the study.
Okay, and I thank you for that, because that would be, you know, there's two sides of this. I guess that this also can provide an opportunity to infill a lot of areas that have been taken out previously. But I get to the presenter's comment that these tracks are being, or trails are being relocated that were not as part of the plan. And therefore, if that's the case, are these rather ambitious folks that are actually doing this work, are they engaged in getting into any of those sensitive areas, or are we monitoring that to make sure that doesn't happen?
Through the chair, our typical compliance process is following up when the works begin and to visit the site, particularly if it's a compliance matter, to ensure that the works are being undertaken as per the requirements and the details of the permit and the conditions. So there will be follow-up on this site because it is a compliance matter. As a part of the permit, they did identify, as I noted in a plan, where the works are being undertaken. They detailed where the structures were being constructed. In terms of new trails, they did identify some areas where they are connecting existing trails, where they are creating, and I'm not a mountain bike rider, but bump outs to offer for safe passage, or if a rider needs to come off the trail. That's all identified within our permit. So all those locations, we would be able to follow up to ensure that they're following that permit.
So, and finally, Mr. Chairman, if I could, the presenter will address this in more detail after my questions, I'm sure. So we're confident that the works that are undertaken there are works that we've approved and supportive of, and are not in any way endangering, endangered species or threatened species, for example, that we had previously identified in our inventory. We can have that assurance, can we?
Through the chair, that's the conclusion our technical staff and planning staff have determined, and that our policies have been met, and that was the recommendation they made to me to ask for the permit to be approved.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Woodhouse. Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Graveline, if I could go to you and just for sake of clarity to the board, I met Mr. Graveline and Mr. Bauer at the site. I'm going to say about 6 weeks ago. They contacted me as their NPCA board rep and asked me if I would meet them at the site. Maybe it was 4 weeks ago, I don't know. But I want to make it clear that I do have a relationship with both of these gentlemen. Met them at the site. I have walked the trails now twice. And so I have some questions for you, Mr. Graveline, if you don't mind. First of all, what role has the city of St. Catharines played in this? Because I know it's within the boundaries of St. Catharines. Have you communicated with them on this?
Yes, we reached out to Mayor Senzik and to our councilors, Matt Harris and to Joe Kushner. They basically responded in similar fashion to what we heard from the games and their partners, that their understanding was, well, to quote Mayor Senzik, that there was no new construction occurring in this area. And the other councilors basically came back with the same response, that it's their understanding that approvals were met and everything was fine, and they referred it to staff. Now, we haven't heard anything further from staff, but in our ongoing correspondence back and forth, it did become clear, Joe Kushner, I believe, was the one who was forthcoming with this, about the arrangement between the city after the games and the Niagara Trail Maintenance Association, who are the contractors, and that they would be given the rights to maintain the trails thereafter. Other than that, we haven't received any support from the city, to be honest, except for information.
So am I correct to sum it up thusly then, in your opinion, Mr. Graveline, that the citizens of St. Catharines and everybody involved more or less believe that the trail, I understand that Steve Bauer was instrumental in designing the original trail that was supposed to be in a different location. And for those on this call who may not be aware, Steve Bauer is an Olympic gold medalist in this event, and he lives here in St. Catharines and was consulted by the games to design the trail. So am I correct then in surmising that, or stating that the original trail was going in a different location? It was moved, and yes, that was covered in your presentation. No approvals were sought that somehow it moved. OPG had the understanding that whatever was happening, NPCA was somehow involved and everything was being, I'll call it, blessed. But in fact, into virgin territory where no trails existed, new trails were being made.
That would be correct. Now, if I could go back to Brock, where the original course was outlined in the original bid in 2016, and November 2019, it was reviewed by all parties, including Cycling Canada. There were no problems with that course. What happened after, and I've already put in a Freedom of Information request, and we've tried to get answers from Brock. It's kind of interesting. Brock said the decision was entirely the game's, and the games say the decision was entirely Brock's. But what we did find out from individuals who did not want themselves to be identified is that for some reason Brock decided they had to ask the Niagara Escarpment Commission for a permit. The response that came back, and I think it was bylaw 1.31 or whatever, I have it written somewhere, basically stated that Brock would not be allowed to use the trail system for motorized vehicles. Bicycle is not a motorized vehicle. And somehow that trail of information got to the games people, and it was upon that decision that they decided they were going to go over to 12 Mile Creek. Now, I'm still trying to confirm that 100%, but many people who are close to it have told us that. And we have tried to reach out to Brock officials on many occasions, and they have basically said, you have to speak to the games people. It was their decision.
So when the day that I walked those trails with you and Mr. Bauer, a number of, I'm going to say it, disturbances were pointed out to me. Rocks were being relocated in large quantity. I mean, I'm going to say hundreds of rocks were being removed, and features, mountain bike features were being created with them. And you relayed to me, I can't remember if it was you or Steve, relayed to me that in the neighborhood, because you both live in the neighborhood, there was an influx of salamanders caused by all these disturbances. Would you mind just relaying that story?
Yeah, so it's a resident on Riverview Boulevard, further on down towards Lockhart, or the last cul-de-sac on Riverview Boulevard. And yeah, they woke up one morning and they look in their pool and it was filled with salamanders. They said there were, they told me that there were at least 100, and they took a few pictures, but what they really tried to do quickly was to get them out of the pool and back on the land because they have a saltwater system. So yeah, that did happen, and we have pictures.
Okay, Mr. Chair, those are my questions. I do have some comments, but I don't know if that should be like if we're going to close the presentation part of this and then move over to board discussion. I'm not sure how you're planning to do this.
Steve,
thank you, Member Smith. I have another member who'd like to speak, and then we'll come to some conclusion. First-time speaker, Member Shurton. You're muted.
Thank you, Chair Mackenzie. And if my name comes up with a D on it, it was a misprint when I tried to sign in here today. So, Guy, thank you for the presentation. I think it's good for all of us here to understand that there's passion to know what's going on, and hopefully maybe some of the discussions of our senior staff guy of that they feel it's been kind of not as much impact as maybe you guys are concerned with from their point of view. I kind of lean on what staff is suggesting, and hopefully in the long run, maybe this will create more users for the trails, which good, bad, or indifferent, people need to get outside. So those are just my comments, but I did really appreciate your presentation here today, Guy.
Okay, thank you, Member Shurton, without the D. And first-time speaker, Ken K-Wall. Member K-Wall.
Sorry, this is actually my second time around, Chair. So, Mr. Graveline, in your presentation, you asked that an EIS be done. You heard Director Yates respond as to a whole series of activities that the NPCA staff had conducted and did not see the need for an EIS. Does that respond to your concerns?
No, it does not. And I want to be clear here, as I did at the beginning of my presentation. What we're doing today, the NPCA staff have been very professional. They've complied with all our requests. So I'm a little uncomfortable sort of challenging the staff's, the investigation they've done and the information they have. I do have some questions though, if I may, because when I hear a permit has been given from Section 28, which is passive use of trails, this is not passive use of trails. They're building a race course with all kinds of development features, which are jumps and bridges and everything else. So for it to fall under passive, I don't understand that. I'm sorry.
Okay, what I'm going to suggest is that we will have staff give us one or two wrap-up comments. And Member Smith and Mr. Gravelin, you did introduce Mr. Bauer earlier, and Mr. Bauer has indicated he'd like to speak. And welcome, Mr. Bauer, to our meeting. If you have a few brief comments, we have a minute or two that we can entertain them if you are adding to the information that we're discussing. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. As Guy mentioned and Mr. Smith, Member Smith mentioned, I was intimate with the original racecourse design and the bid for the Canada Games here. I was, extremely shocked that they would move such a racecourse. Now, you mentioned trails often in this presentation and in the questions. This is a racecourse track, a double track that runs through this sensitive, erosion-prone, natural, 70% previously untouched ravine of Riverview Boulevard on the east side, which will create a long-term precedent for the future of the natural habitat and the greenbelt setting of this beautiful ravine, which was previously, for the most part, of this race course, untouched. And so my question is, does the permit allow unabated cutting, excavating, cutting natural habitat, removing vegetation, building bridges, damming natural drainage systems, disturbing the natural habitat of wild turkeys, salamanders, possum, fox, hawks, deer, and the sometimes rare passage of a bald eagle? If that's okay, then the permit is okay. But what has happened in this ravine is very sad indeed. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Yes, the Conservation Authority, not knowing about this until September, find ourselves with one hand tied behind our back in a way. I will direct your question, think through to Liani. Yates. Liani, can you try to help Mr. Bauer with that? His query.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. I guess to help clarify, our policies do not define trails within our policies themselves. There is some indication of examples of what those trails may be, and bike trails is within those examples within our policies. And when we're looking at the policies and whether trails would be supported in the valley system, we are looking at the scope of the work, the scale of the work, and assessing the impacts of the work. And as I noted, our staff did work with the applicants to obtain all the information that we felt was required and necessary to demonstrate that what they are doing would not have a negative impact, where we took a step further and requested a restoration plan. So beyond just the original proposal of reseeding the areas where they had removed some ground vegetation and were using hand tools to cut the trails, we took that a step further and asked them to do a restoration plan where they're actually identified areas along with our planning ecologist where there'll be new shrubs and plantings put in place, and that there would be follow-up in the spring to ensure that the seeding that was put down on the exposed soils after the vegetation was removed would be taking or needs to be reseeded. So there are steps that our staff have taken to ensure that that the works comply with our policies, and also taking it a step further to make sure that we are working with them in efforts to enhance this part of the valley system as well.
Thank you, Leanna. Are there any other further questions from the board? Member Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I just had one question, and it's with regards to when the actual races take place. I'm wondering if these races are much of a spectator sport, and whether I don't know if this would be under NPCA's jurisdiction or not, though. But I'll ask the question anyways. Whether if it is a big spectator sport, whether the masses of spectators could impact the sensitive areas, and whether there's been any thought or planning put in to actually restrict the number of spectators or the areas that are sensitive from the spectators, in order to ensure that as little damage as possible is done during the actual during the actual races. Anyways, maybe it's not a big spectator sport and then it just doesn't have an impact. Anyways, that's my question.
Thank you, Member Wright, for your question. I will pass that on to our CAO, Chandra Sharma, and Chandra, can you help us with Member Wright's query?
I will ask staff because they have all the information between Director Yates and her
all right.
team. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. As part of the permit process, we did ask them to identify where that spectator area was to determine if any approvals were required for that. They did identify an area not on the trails. It is, sorry, I'm just looking at the map to make reference. It is down at the area where there's currently the parking lot south, I believe it's Lockhart Drive, and then there's a kind of cleared area to the north of that, not within the wooded area, that they're planning to focus the spectators in that area, and that there would be removable bleachers. So our understanding is that there would not be any spectator bleachers or spectators on the trail itself constructed, so that everything would be at the open area by the parking lot, a controlled spectator area, and staff was satisfied with that.
Thank you, and I think that is something that can be followed up. My question was going to be in relationship in regards to the same thing, but with the media, and where to what point they have access to. So that's something that I'm hoping we can put on the work list. Any other questions, Member Woodhouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up. In terms of the species that we've identified and have a inventory of, whether they be flora, fauna, or whatever. For example, if we have Jefferson salamanders in there, I mean, they are almost extinct. There are some in the Niagara region, I know, and likely there could be even some in that valley. I don't know, but there are a number of salamanders that are endangered and are on the list of threatened species in Ontario. So I guess I'm bothered by the fact of what I hear that some people who aren't professionals in this field made a decision to relocate stones and everything else because it just simply facilitated their efforts or their objective. No consideration or maybe lack of knowledge of what was actually happening there. And I don't know that anybody's taken an inventory of what, if any, of those damages occurred. And I guess to Stephen Bauer and I used to love watching you on TV, my friend. I got to tell you, but like me, it looks like you've lost a lot of your hair too. Anyway, you make mention of the fact, and it seems there's a definition. I have a definition issue here, and that is with how do you define a trail versus a racetrack? I think you indicated that this track has been designed and altered for racing, not as a trail. And I guess in my mind, not having any knowledge of this, I look at a trail as a kind of a passive walking, kind of maybe cycling, kind of thing that doesn't go afar. And I know where I live on Lake Gibson, there's kids down not far from me on OPG property that are using their motorcycles driving through the bush, and you can see the disruption it creates for a lot of wildlife in there. Could you talk to me a bit about the difference between those two and how you define it as a professional?
Well, you can surmise that a racetrack is conducive to higher speeds and higher skilled participants of racing. So therefore, the groundwork would be more substantial. For example, the Trail Maintenance Association are building up and carving out berms, bankings in the soil and the ravine slope to be conducive for traction and speed. So you can imagine a ramp or a berm that holds, traction of a rider. The excavation that's going on in the ravine is to level a steep slope. So the carving out of the soil to make sure that passage of a race, or even to build a trail, like the excavation of these two out and back tracks through this ravine is being carved out of this slope to allow passage. Even now, it's even difficult to walk. It's so muddy and wet and slippery. But with further work, they'll just carve it out so that it's conducive to passage, even walking. So you can imagine for racing, allowing the speed to hold traction it's a substantial cut, substantial widening of the vegetation and to allow passage. It's a substantial work. It's a substantial build. It's not minor improvements of an existing trail system. This is a complete new build of, call it a trail, but, conducive to a race course. That's the goal. It's for the Canada Summer Games. So they're building a race course.
So
thank you, Mr. Bauer.
And follow up on that,
sorry,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Go ahead, Member Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr.
But I will want to cut this discussion off shortly.
Thank you. My question in that regard is to the extent of rehabilitation after the races. Is there any plans to rehabilitate any of these areas that have been altered and will be altered further to accommodate the race aspect of this track to back to where it became what it was originally, basically a walking riding trail?
Well, we going to put that back to Leanna. She already has commented about seeding and replanting. There will be some rehabilitation required, and I might suggest that we could expect to ask staff for a report on what will be required and who's going to pay for that or who's going to do it. But Leanna, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Can you Go ahead. In terms of rehabilitation.
You, Mr. Chair, for the purpose of our permit, we did ask for the restoration plan, and as I did note, it involves reseeding areas where there was soil exposure as a result of the vegetation removal for the construction of the trails, but also identifying areas within that trail system and network where new plantings would be appropriate to enhance the vegetation in that area. And our staff did walk the trails with a qualified professional that Canada Summer Games has retained to put that plan together, and Canada Summer Games is paying for that work to be done as part of their permit in the restoration plan. In terms of the long-term use and plans for the trail, unfortunately, NPCA staff are not involved in those discussions. I can't give certainty on what the future use of the lands is. My understanding is that there is some discussion for this trail network to be a legacy network. However, I don't have the details on who will own it, maintain it, and the future use of it. I just know the information as it relates to our permit.
Okay, and does that permit have an end date?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our permits have 2 years to complete the works, but my understanding is the event is next year, so they will be making their best efforts to get ready for the event.
Okay, so the question of legacy is I'm going to say yet to be debated. Member Smith, do you have a short question?
Yes, I do. I'd like to clarify one thing. It is my understanding that there is not actually any debate on legacy, that those trails are, like, I understand what Leilani was explaining, that there will be some reseeding, but that's in this, I'm going to call it the spillover areas. The trails that are being created are going to remain. There has been a lot of dialogue, to my understanding. I haven't been involved in this. And Mr. Graveline, Mr. Bauer, maybe one of you can make more comment on this, but these are trails that once created, the intent is for them to remain, or will they be planted over once the event is finished?
I can, sorry, may I speak?
I think that's Mr. Bauer speaking, is it?
No, it's
or
Mr.
Mr.
Graveline, but I just want to make sure I'm not out of order here. May I respond?
You may respond to Member Smith.
Okay, so the key word here is permanent. And as I mentioned earlier in one of my responses to a question, the correspondence that we've exchanged with the city makes it very clear that the city does not want to maintain these trails. They're going to pass it on to the mountain bike group, and they will look after the trails. The intent here is it's going to be permanent. Now, you have to understand that these trails that are being developed, and I'm even calling them trails, they're becoming larger paths. Once they're ridden by bikes, and they continue to be ridden by bikes, the encroachment will be wider, and the likelihood that there will be any reinstatement of that the natural areas I have difficulty understanding how that can be. It's going to be like pavement after a while, after they ride it and ride it and ride it. And I go back to,
okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Graveline, I think we've got a picture now of what's in front of us here. The answer is that you might be looking for from us is not necessarily clear. I'm going to suggest, unless there's a
I could clarify that if you'd like.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes. We would like the NPCA, as we said in our last slide, to actually work with us and to stand out a little bit with respect to what's happening here. There was no need for more trails in this area, number one. Number two, to call it passive, that's a misnomer. These are not passive trails. So from our perspective, they should not be given a permit. Now, we are not the experts here again, and I'm not trying to go against staff's recommendations. I'm giving you my opinion. And
I appreciate that, Mr. Graveline, and we have to move on.
Yep, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah. Member Brady.
Okay, based on the conversation that.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. Based on the conversation I've heard, what I understand is, one, that the permit would have been given in its form even if the work hadn't have been started, because it meets the criteria for such. Two, the permit that's now been issued has more rehabilitation in it than it probably would have, because the people started early, so it's a slap on the wrist for doing it early, so there's to be more rehabilitation. So we have a permit that has been issued for this area, which my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, meets our criteria for such permits, and has restoration features in it, which are over and above what we would normally have done. Is that correct?
I'm going to pass that on to Leanne.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you. Okay, we've heard from the delegation. I'm going to suggest that we refer to this to staff, because there may be opportunities here for further work, and also for further communication between the landowners and the proponents of this project. I don't. That's my suggestion at this time. And
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Not further comment, I will ask for a motion to receive this delegation. Member Smith.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Can I suggest, although I think what's happened here is staff was caught between a rock and a hard place, and I absolutely feel that. You know, we, the NPCA, didn't get notified of this till basically October. So in the last 5 or 6 weeks, we became aware. Can I suggest that an appropriate course of action may be that we, staff did what they, they followed the regulations and they did what they, issued the permit. However, I think it would be appropriate for us as the board to direct a letter to the Canada Summer Games, not to the landowner, but to the Canada Summer Games, seeking good faith dialogue with them, outlining the concerns of citizens. We are a conservation authority. We share those concerns. Yes, our staff has done some, but we haven't done multi-seasonal environmental impact studies on the area or anything very, I'm going to use the word in-depth. We should be reaching out.
Are you prepared to make this a motion?
I am, yes. Okay. So my motion would be that the NPCA reaches out to the Canada Summer Games, expressing more or less encapsulating what we've heard here, and seeking a mutually beneficial way forward with the intent of removing these trails from this location.
All right, and do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second it.
Mr. Chair, just a quick point of order.
Thank you, Member Wood.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member. Yeah, go ahead, Member Foster.
Yeah, just a quick point of order. I'm going to declare conflict of interest on this as we're following through with this. I'm a volunteer on the Canada Summer Games, and I don't feel it's appropriate that I should be part of a motion like this. So thank you.
Thank you. Grant, I have a technical question for you. Do we, before we entertain Member Smith's motion, do we need to pass a motion in receiving the delegation?
You don't need to, but it's certainly an acceptable course of action and maybe in fact preferable.
Thank you, Grant. Member Smith, before I call your motion for discussion, I'm going to go back and ask for a mover for the presentation. Member Brady's moved it, and second by Member Metcalf. All in favor of receiving the delegation? Okay, that has been approved. Thank you very much. Now we have another motion on the floor, moved by Member Smith, and it was seconded by, are you seconding that, Member Halinga?
No, but I would like to potentially do a minor amendment that in addition to the request, the request also with the Games Committee that there be a rehabilitation of the trail after the games. So restore it back to its pre-games condition.
Member Halinga, I think that what we need to start the discussion, and if the motion from Member Smith does pass, that I think the letter from the Conservation Authority is to start a dialogue, and certainly that type of that will be part. I can't see it being part of the dialogue, so I'd like to keep the motion fairly straightforward. And I believe Member Woodhouse, you second the motion, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion on the floor. There is time for discussion of this motion. Member Brady.
It would appear that what the motion would set in place is to remove ultimately the permit. And I will oppose that. What we have heard is that the permit was issued properly. It was issued in the way that it would have if they had followed the correct process. And it's also issued with additional things to fix up the environment after the fact. So I'll be opposing the motion that's brought forward by Mr. Smith, Member Smith.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Member K-Wall.
Could the clerk please reread the motion?
Thank you. Grant?
The draft wording of the motion that I have is that a letter or contact be made with Canada Games expressing the opportunity to seek a mutually beneficial way forward and to remove trails after the 2022 summer games.
If I may clarify, the removal of trails after was not part of my motion. My motion was to actually move the site. But let's do it in good faith partnership with the Canada Summer Games. There are other suitable sites. And I think a dialogue, the Canada Summer Games is serious about their environmental footprint. They're going to, I believe, I take them at their word value, at the value of their word. And so I think we can make headway if we approach them in good faith and not have this happen.
Thank you, Member Smith. I'm hearing two different motions from you, and your first motion, I didn't hear you include about moving the trail, but to work together to beneficial towards a beneficial solution, and not guiding what that solution will be. So I think before we vote on this motion, Grant, would you be able to share your screen if you put this in writing? I would like to avoid confusion with this motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I could interject, Member Rapley, I see on the screen, has been trying to, I think, make some comments on this, and he may be having some technical issues he's dealing with. I just saw you, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair, I just thought, as a conservation authority, it was mentioned that these salamanders, a massive amount of them, migrated and ended up in a swimming pool. we need to clarify that. Were they redback salamanders or were they blue spotted or Jefferson or something? Because we could have already had a problem with Endangered Species Act. Does anybody know what kind of salamanders they were? It's been raised. I think we should clarify.
1 second. Member Rapley, I'm going to hold on to that for a minute, okay? Grant, were you able to hear my request of you?
Yes, I was, and as I said, I don't have it in. I don't have it on a screen in an electronic format. So,
okay. What we'll do is we'll rely on you really giving us the motion, and we'll hold on to the salamander question, Member Rapley. Now, Member Smith, it's your motion, so I don't know whether you've written it down in your own handwriting, so we refer to the same motion each. We know what we're voting on if we're going to vote on this. So it's.
I have not written it down. Actually, it's a flyer that but more or less what I'm saying is we need to start a dialogue with the Canada Summer Games with the intention of, if possible, getting them to relocate.
Okay. That's the motion that's on the floor, ladies and gentlemen, is to begin a dialogue with, you certainly can. 1 second, Chandra. Dialogue with Canada Summer Games with the intention of seeing how this trail can be moved. I would like to ask staff for a comment. Our CEO Sharma like to comment.
No, I wasn't commenting on that, Chair Mackenzie. I was just suggesting everybody mute themselves because we are having so much sound disruption and nobody can hear what's going on. So please mute yourself, and that's all I would say. But again, if a motion is introduced, it should be at the board level and board should sign it because staff have already issued a permit, so it will be against, what we've already told them to do. So I just want to be clear there, okay?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yeah. Go ahead, Member Woodhouse.
My seconding of the motion did not include relocating the race or the track or the trail or the move it to another area. Obviously, there's a lot of work that's been done. I think I was more interested in ensuring that there wasn't damage done, and any of the initiatives that have been taken as part of the games, that there be sufficient funds put aside to make sure that it's rehabilitated and that these areas are under control. Going through a whole site change and everything else is not what I seconded, Member Smith.
Okay, thank you, Member Woodhouse. So Member Smith has made a motion. He's looking for a seconder. Is there a seconder? Member Kaywall seconds the motion. Okay. Any further discussion? And Member Foster, can you take the chair for a minute, please? Are you still with us, Member Foster?
Yeah, I'm here, Member Mackenzie. I've declared a conflict of this, so
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Member Kaywall, can you take the chair? You second it, so I'm going to ask Member Woodhouse if you can take the chair for a second.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment that our CIO, I think, has made notice of a caution to the board in that the Conservation Authority has provided a permit for this work. Putting the board in a position of revoking or jeopardizing this permit is not a comfortable position or it may not be productive. So we need to move forward slowly as the motion is presently framed. Thank you, Member Woodhouse. I'll take the chair back.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Member Halinga, you wish to discuss this motion?
My intention was not to step on the staff's permit, but we certainly can ask for rehabilitation to pre-games condition as part of the future for this area.
Thank you. Member Smith, does that sound like a friendly amendment?
I would accept it as that if we amended it to ensure that at least the trails will be rehabilitated into their natural state. So including the developments should be removed, but that's okay. I understand it's a dialogue, but we should start the discussion on post-game. The trails do not remain, and the area is returned to its natural state.
Okay, I'm going to, Member Brady, I'm sorry. For motion.
No problem. What I'd like to have is clarification. The permit that was it issued for a trail that would be left as a permanent trail, or is it for a trail that is a temporary trail? You just need clarification on that.
Thank you. Leanne, are you still with us?
Thank you. Through the chair, the permit doesn't specify whether it's permanent or temporary. It's the construction of a trail.
For the construction of the trail.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that sound like it gives us a little bit of leeway one way or the other, Member Brady?
Can we call this vote? I got to get rolling. This has been ridiculous.
Member Shurton, we're working hard to get through this. I'm sorry that you're got a time frame, but we've invested a lot into this. We want to get it right. It's not going to go away. So, Member Smith, would you be agreeable to a motion saying that the Conservation Authority Board write a letter to Canada Summers Game to begin a dialogue into the present and future trail in that we're discussing?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chair, I would. With the modifier that we are looking to return the whole area to its natural state after the event. It seems to me that's the best we can hope for in this situation.
CAO Sharma, did you have a comment? Okay. So there's a motion on the floor, send a letter to the Canada Summers Game from the board, seeking dialogue on the present trail and the future condition of the site. I'd like to keep it somewhat open so a dialogue can begin without finding a door shut in front of us. Okay. So I'm going to call it for a vote. In favor? I'm going to take a recorded vote just to get it right. Grant, are you prepared to write the names down, or do you want to go through the names yourself?
I am absolutely willing to go through the names and get the recorded vote.
Thank you.
It's a good time because I know we're going to lose quorum shortly as well. So very quickly,
yep.
Yay or nay, Member Beatty? Oh, he's gone. He told me on this break he's gone. My apologies. Member Brady?
No.
Member Cridland?
No.
Member Foster? You've declared a conflict. My apologies.
Conflict, yep.
Yeah.
Member Halinga.
Yes.
Member Ingrail.
Yes.
Member K-Wall.
Yes.
Member Hewson. It's gone. Member Johnson is gone. Member Metcalf.
Yes.
Member Rapley.
Yes.
Member Shurton.
No.
Member Smith.
Yes.
Member Steele.
A little confused, but yes.
Member Woodhouse.
I'm not confused. Yes.
Member Wright.
Yes.
And so the vote is carried.
Thank you, Grant, for your assistance. The vote's carried. I'd like to thank everybody for their patience with this discussion. I'd like to thank the presenters, Mr. Gravelin and Mr. Bauer, for your participation in this. And you may stay for the rest of the meeting if you so wish. We're going to move on to item number 7A. This is for receipt. Comfort Maple tree assessment. Going to suggest moved by member Ingrail and second by member Metcalf. All in favor? This is for approval. I'm sorry. No, this is for receipt. Show of hands, please. If there's any discussion, okay, that's approved. Thank you. We've done 8A. 8B is a Wainfleet Bog Advisory Committee Terms of Reference. This is for approval. Adam Christie is here with us. Should you have any questions, I'm going to have this moved by member Wright, second by member Cridlin. Questions? Member K-Wall.
Just one point of clarification. In the terms of reference, it talks about appointing members for a 4-year term. And it also talks about a couple of those members being NPCA board members. The terms aren't going to line up because the current board members are going to be off the board come October 2022. Okay, so just a suggestion for figure out how the language should work on that. That's all.
Yes, and that's noted by staff. And CEO Sharma, do you have any further comment?
Just for clarity, it's a 4-year term for the member. This committee is staggered. So if the board member comes on board, if they have to leave because they're no more a board member, they leave and someone else gets appointed. So the terms of reference, fine. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we have that motion on the floor for approval of the terms of reference. All in favor? That's approved. Thank you very much. Sorry that I'm trying to go through the rest of the agenda quickly, but the Wainfleet Advisory Committee, that's an important step into our future. And this, item 8C is report number 68, 2021, transition plan in accordance with section 21.1.4 of the Conservation Authorities Act. This is approval. I'm going to move it by member Steele, seconded by member Foster, and any discussion on this plan? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Approved. Thank you. These following are committee reports. Item 9.1 finance agenda. It's the minutes of the finance committee meeting dated November 4th, 2021. Member Metcalf is the chair of that committee. I'm going to have member Metcalf move receiving the minutes of the finance committee, seconded by member Rapley. Any discussion? All right. Call the vote. All, so show your hands for approval. Any opposed? Thank you. Approved. Item 9B, report number FA 69-21, the financial report for receipt. Lise Gagnon is here. Should there be any questions? Moved by Member Smith, second by Member K-Wall, and floor is open if there's any discussion. Member K-Wall.
Thank you. Question for Director Gagnon. Has our concern with the CRA over the CERB repayment, has that been resolved yet, or is that still outstanding?
It is actually still outstanding, so we are following the proceedings very carefully. There are several conservation authorities all in the same, dealing with the same issue. We continue to leave our options open as much as we can insofar as applying for periods for which we are eligible so that we are able to pivot and remain open to any and all options as they present themselves.
So just a follow-up question. If we were not successful with that issue and the resolution happens in calendar 2021, does that impact the financial statement that you show on Q3?
It does not, given that when this all surfaced at the end of the last fiscal year, we prudently booked a provision on the balance sheet as a contingent liability so that if the decision does not result in our favor, we have a provision to just repay the federal government without an operating impact.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call the vote now. All in favor? Any opposed? No, it can't be. Thank you. Approved. And thanks, Member K-Wall, for always alerting us to this question. And Lisa, and thank you for balancing and keeping track of these moving balls. We depend on you. Next one, 9C, reports. FA 70-2021, 2022 draft budgets and municipal levies. This is for approval. And I'm going to move this by, Member Woodhouse, second by Member Cridlin. Any discussion? Member K-Wall.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of items. In the document, I noticed that there's a recommendation for increase of 4 FTEs to the headcount. So my question is, does the board actually have oversight or approval responsibilities with respect to FTEs? Or is our oversight responsibilities just with respect to the budget?
Did you want to take this, Chandra, or shall I?
I can take it. Go ahead.
My understanding is that the board approval is for the budget as a whole, which includes the FTE complement. Certainly, it's something that the board is fully entitled to question and validate and whatnot to alleviate any concerns. Just to try to do indeed exactly that. You should know that the additional FTEs are funded from just self-generated funds so that there's no levy impact.
So thank you. So does the finance committee actually take on the responsibility of having a look at FTEs? Because we don't have an HR committee, which is some other boards do. So does the finance committee look at this?
Through you, Chair, yes, indeed, the Finance Committee was provided with detailed business cases in support of the request for the increases to FTE complement, and so that's come through the Finance Committee, certainly.
Okay, all right, thank you. So my other question is with respect to the capital side and the list of projects that are not being funded at the moment, okay? And I think the amount there is in excess of $7 million. What happens to the state of those assets if we continually do not fund improvements or repairments to those assets?
Through you, Chair. Yes, it's $7.723 million is the current unfunded budget priorities. Not all of them are asset related, but primarily, but the majority of them are. And as evidenced by the state of good repair gap, that is one of the line items in that unbudgeted pressure list. Of course, there's no point in beating around the bush as assets are not maintained due to a lack of resources. They do indeed continue to deteriorate. We are in the process now and have been for about a year and a half. We've got a fixed asset register and an asset database that tracks what happens to those assets as they continue to deteriorate, and we'll be able to measure the impact of that in a quantifiable way going forward. That being said, it's, as we all know, a lack of financial resources at this point to allow us to address all of those priorities. As funding mechanisms become available, we certainly address any of those unfunded budget priorities as opportunity presents itself. You should know that we have applied for and been successful in applying for external funding to the tune of $901,000 in the 2021 fiscal year. We apply for everything we possibly are qualified or eligible to apply. We were unsuccessful in our bid for $1.9 million from various funding sources as well in 2021. And we are waiting for decisions on several others, including the 2 billion trees proposal, which is still in the works at this point. So all of that to say is that we are trying our level best to try to find resources to address some of these priorities.
Okay, and can you, so the last question along that line, can you tell me approximately how much is left in our capital reserve?
About $530,000.
Okay, so in an emergency, that isn't going to go very far, right, to address
Agreed.
a $7.2 million gap. My suggestion is going to be we need to ramp up the discussion here with funding municipalities. I mean, to just continually show them a list of $7.2 million worth of assets isn't going to get us anywhere. So I'm not sure I have a solution, but I think we need to be more assertive, if that's the right word, in trying to find ways to fund that. Because I take what you say, Direct, again, with respect to trying to find all sorts of sources to fund those. But those are going to become really, really critical if they start to deteriorate in the near future. And whatever staff.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask if we can go. I'd like to suggest we go back to the motion that's on the floor. Your point is well taken, and we talk about it continuously, and maybe someday we'll find a solution. And we do need to be reminded about it. So I'm going to call the motion, and all those in favor of the draft budget and municipal levies report. Thank you. Approved. Item 10, we're not aware of any motions. Or item 11, notices the motion. And new business, we have a report, a verbal report from our CAO. Chandra, can you go ahead, please?
Chair Mackenzie, in the interest of time, I would just say that we can send a written update to the board on the holiday trail. This is what we were going to provide. It's 12:55. I would like the members to go. I just want to share that the printed copies of the strategic plans have just come out, and they look really good, and they are on recycled paper. So that's our climate change commitment in everything we do, and it looks really good. Alicia Powell will be sending you a written update on the holiday trail, which is turning out to be a great event, like I said, and we have a whole bunch of community members coming out for free to enjoy the trail in the evening with their kids. So that's all I would say. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I do apologize you and the members for the length of this meeting, but we're near the completion. And on the agenda, Rob, Member Foster, update for the Conservation Foundation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And what we'll be doing is Member Cridlin and I are in a foundation meeting next week, and we'll provide a report back to the board after that meeting. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to that. And Member Shurton, you have the floor is yours. Oh, I can't hear you, Member Shurton. Member Shurton, you're muted.
Rob, unmute yourself.
Oh. I think I know. Member Shurton, we cannot hear you. Would you like me to paraphrase?
Paraphrase me today. But my question is, moving forward, and I understand everybody's busy, but we have to somehow have a plan of meeting in person. So it can be done through an email. I don't know what the plan is, but I haven't really missed the last 4 meetings based on this meeting went today. We had 2 long discussions that took almost 3 hours. I know they're important, but there comes to a point where you got to say, okay, anything else, send an email to the chair and we'll get some questions answered. Anyways, that's my point. Okay. Hopefully we can get an answer when we're going to meet in person.
Well, I will relay your thoughts to Chair Johnson, and I welcome, and Chair Johnson does, any communications, please send them our way. And I would now like to call for Member Ingrao to move adjournment, seconded by Member Steele. All in favor? So I think, folks, we'll see you. That's approved. I think we'll see you on December 17th. I think that's the correct date, is it not, CAO Sharma? For our December meeting?
Yes, we have a December meeting. And
okay. Well, in the meantime, everybody, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your good discussions. Stay safe. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.